Welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs, a podcast for the lit curious reader, because why not read a little bit of everything? I'm Jennifer Smith.
And I'm Joey Kelly.
And this is our third installment talking about the Odyssey. We decided to break our conversation into three distinct parts. This week, we will be discussing the last third of the poem, covering books 17 through 24. Lot is happening in these final pieces of the poem. Joey, was there something in particular that struck you about the ending? Obviously, you and I have both read this before. We're aware of the story. Did anything stick out to you on this reading that surprised you?
Not that it surprised me, because this is a reread, so it's hard to say that something shocked me. I mean, there's lots of little details that I wouldn't have remembered unless I had studied it formally and was talking and thinking about it all the time. I guess the thing that stuck out the most this time was I didn't really remember how visceral and grotesque the scenes are when Odysseus is killing the suitors and Telemachus is also killing them. Because it is very much like the Iliad in that sense. The Homeric epic tells you where blades go in, a lot of times it's by the nipple. I don't know why. I guess because by your heart or whatever. They tell you how it came out, what exactly did it. And it's all sort of very methodically told. And I found myself wondering, is this gratuitous violence or is this merited? I'm not sure. I think it's a little bit more complex than that. We'll probably talk about that in more detail, but that's what stuck out. How about you?
Well, Joey, I'm glad that you said that, because what has been running through my mind over our last couple of conversations is how much moralizing and how much storytelling, like a parable. It is, I'm going to show you examples of what you should do. I'm going to show you examples of what happens when you break the rules. And here is how to avenge a wrong that has been done to you. So when you were talking about the visceral nature of describing each one of the main bad guy suitors, what Odysseus did to him, how they were dealt with, I was like, okay, I understand if I was looking at this from a moral tale. We often ask, who was this for? What was the whole point of recording this epic poem that has lasted over 2,000 years? What was this about? We talked about the value signaling that Penelope needs to stay chaste and be this faithful wife, and what happens when you have a wife that takes up with someone else. All of the stories we rehashed last week. Some of these over-the-top violent scenes, I think, are also to keep the readers/listeners, at that point it would have been listeners, keep the listeners engaged in the story, but also the fear and loathing that comes from someone getting their retribution against you. You need to be afraid. You need to know that breaking the rules of hospitality will not be overlooked. And that's what really stuck out for me.
Yeah, I just want to read a brief excerpt from one of these moments, just to give everyone a sense of what we're actually talking about, if you have not read the Odyssey yet. Okay, this is in the very beginning of book 22, which Emily Wilson calls Bloodshed, aptly named. Odysseus aimed at his throat, then shot. The point pierced all the way through his soft neck. He flopped down to the side, and his cup spilled out of his hand, and then thick streams of blood gushed from his nostrils. His foot twitched and knocked the table down, food scattered on the ground. The bread and roasted meat were soiled with blood. Seeing him fall, the suitors in an uproar with shouts that filled the hall jumped up and rushed to search around by all the thick stone walls for shields or swords to grab. There were none. They angrily rebuked Odysseus. That was just one of them. There are a few others because there's more than one suitor. This is the big baddie, Antinous. He is main suitor that is definitely our antagonist as far as suitors go. Maybe he's the antagonist of the entire poem. I'm not really sure. I feel like the gods really should be the antagonist because they're kind of just messing him up every time. But I think if you've read the Iliad, obviously I know you have, Jennifer, the royal you, to our listeners, these are descriptions that happen all the time because they're actively in war at Troy, of course. But I think it's sort of startling for the Odyssey because there's not really this grotesque use of language to describe murder. The Cyclops eats people and Scylla is eating people, but it's not as detailed as this. And I think it's probably because it's a mortal man killing another mortal man. And I'm including the Iliad in this. whether you think these are anti-war poems or not, I think Homer, whoever this may have been, seems like they were trying to communicate the realities of violence. Oh, don't admire Odysseus because he is willing to murder, to avenge himself and his family and his kingdom, because this is what you would have to do in order to do that. This is what that looks like.
Yeah, Joy, I appreciate you saying that because it was coming to my mind when you said, well, when the Cyclops did this and Scylla did this, those are mythical, otherworldly type creatures. They're not the guy next door who is perpetrating these murders. And to me, holding the gods accountable for some of these horrible tragedies that happened, that tracks because they were definitely taking sides and interfering in the natural order of things. And I appreciate that you said, instead of glorifying Odysseus as this great hero, we talked a lot about in previous episodes about his crying, his lamenting, his visit down to the underworld where he saw people who died as a result of these violent acts. And they're like, we don't need your glory. We don't want that. Can we just check our glory and go back to the lives we had before we embarked on these endeavors? That was teeing back up to this morality tale. What is the nature of the world? Who should be in charge? Who deserves to be rewarded? Who should be punished? When we were talking about this offline, you had mentioned you were very curious and wanted to explore why Odysseus, after the suitors are slain, right? It's like, I came in here, I said I was going to clean up this mess, i.e. the people. He gets rid of all of them. The first thing he says is, get the women, get the slaves in here to clean up the blood and then have them all assemble because I've got one more thing I need to do with them. Dory, do you want to explain what he did after the women completed their task?
Yeah, and they are not dumb, and they knew it was going to happen. I just want to read that as well because I think it's impactful there. It says, sobbing desperately, the girls came, weeping, clutching at each other. They carried out the bodies of the dead and piled them up on top of one another under the roof outside. Odysseus instructed them and forced them to continue. And then they cleaned his lovely chairs and tables with wet, absorbent sponges, while the prince and herdsmen with their shovels scraped away the mess to make the sturdy floor all clean. The girls picked up the trash and took it out. The men created order in the house and set it all to rights, then led the girls outside and trapped them. They could not escape between the courtyard wall and the rotunda. Showing initiative, Telemachus insisted, I refuse to grant these girls a clean death, since they poured down shame on me and mother when they lay beside the suitors. At that, he wound a piece of sailor's rope round the rotunda and round the mighty pillar, stretched up so high no foot could touch the ground. As doves or thrushes spread their wings to fly home to their nests, but someone sets a trap. They crash into a net, a bitter bedtime, just so the girls, their heads all in a row, were strung up with the noose around their necks to make their death in agony. They gasped, feet twitching for a while, but not for long. And then they go to brutalize one of the other slaves. I wanted to read that because the slave women are not stupid and they are aware that this is happening. They're like, you're going to make us clean up this mess and then you're going to kill us. But Odysseus does mention before he enters back into his palace that he's aware that these women have been raped by these suitors and they don't have any choice.
Even as you are recounting these horrible acts of violence, there's also beauty in the description. It felt birds' wings and going into a trap. It's so beautifully articulated for something that is so heinous. And it does call into question, earlier in the poem, we do observe a interaction between Odysseus and Telemachus saying, you need to slice them. You need to stick your sword and kill these women. And he was like, okay, I'm on it. I need to accomplish the goal that my father has set for me. And when the time comes, he doesn't. It's curious to me, why did he not do that? I have not perpetrated a murder on anyone, so I am not speaking from experience, but I can imagine the act of hanging someone is a cleaner way to go than it would be to stick a sword through someone and cause their death. The cynical side of me was like, oh, of course, if you killed dozen girls, women who were in their service, these were the ones that were accused of either voluntarily siding with the suitors by sleeping with them, or as you had said, that it's fairly likely that they were coerced or raped. There was not a power balance where these enslaved people could be like, hey, you know, it'd be great. Invaders, we totally want to get down with you. We have been waiting so long for you to come and ruin our lives. And so I just thought it was very interesting that Telemachus is also wise enough to say, how about I do a murder that does not require a lot of cleanup because my cleanup crew are actually the people that I'm murdering at this moment.
I'm not a classicist, so take this with a grain of salt. But I have a feeling it has to do with the sort of a warrior's death is by the blade. So if you die in combat, that's a worthy way of being killed and dying. But being hung is certainly not. I'm not saying it's a cowardice way, but I'm saying I think that's probably what this was seen as. Another type of insult to these women was, oh, we'll hang you. We're not even going to murder you by a blade of some kind. We're going to hang you all at one time. Speaking about morality, we do have to question Odysseus's motivations and his morality, because is he correct for killing all of the suitors? Well, he kills Antinous. Again, I'm pretty sure that's how I said it. As I read, he shoots an arrow and it goes literally right through his neck and he dies. All the other suitors are like, oh my God, that's Odysseus. That's Odysseus. And so we gotta go. I forgot I left my oven on in my
And we'll
kingdom.
pay you back. Remember, Joey, they said, hey, we realized, it just occurred to me, we were completely wrong and we'll just pay you back. It's no harm, no foul. We'll just send you a check. It'll be fine.
Yeah, he could have just killed one and said, you're the example, you were the ringleader, because they all say, no, we actually, you know what? Thank God you did that. He was such a bad guy and now we're free. So we're going to go. We'll pay you back. I owe you. Okay. But he doesn't. He's like, these doors are locked and you're not getting out. He could have done that. So is he correct for this retribution? Is this the correct thing to do? Or is this the noble or heroic thing to do, is to kill unarmed men? I mean, there is a way that they are supposed to be getting weapons and armor, but they don't have them. They're not armed when he goes in there. He's armed. And Telemachus
And why
is
aren't
armed.
they armed, Joey? This is an important plot point of the story. They are not armed where their armaments are usually against the wall. Athena had whispered in Telemachus's ear and said, we're going to have a strategy because you're going to be completely outnumbered. So why don't you tell them you need to take all of the weapons that are hanging up for cleaning, and you don't want them to spoil a good time by fighting. And if your weapons are at hand, there was one quote that said, having weapons at hand makes it more likely that men will fight, something to that effect. So let's not spoil our banquet. Everybody put your weapons outside and we'll just close the door and have a good time. And all the while they were plotting this strategy to disarm these men so they could murder them. It occurred to me, because I keep referring to it, there's a lot of morals and a lot of stories being told about correct behavior, but we also know Odysseus has a really short temper. He has had enough, and he often, with the Cyclops, he was like, I'm not going to let this slide. I could have gotten away scot-free, but I had to boast. I had to assert that everyone is going to remember me. And what is a better way to be remembered than taking revenge and frustration out on the suitors who were tarnishing your household and stealing all your food and trying to sleep with your wife? I think that was the thing that made him the most angry. You are not allowed to flirt or court another man's wife. Thinking about when this was written, property laws, matrimony, all of those things, it probably is a huge no-no to actively seek out another person's wife. That property, sorry to put it so bluntly, belongs to someone else. And she doesn't have free will to choose to run off. Because when women run off with their suitors, or they decide that they've had enough, people die.
Yeah, war literally was just fought. Yeah, it's just a really interesting idea that we have these two acts of mass murder right next to each other with the suitors and the slave women, because as I was mentioning, we have to make a decision. Is Odysseus right for murdering all of these men? Is there another solution? He's also being influenced by a divine power, Athena. We talk about this a lot, actually, and we always talk about Greek myth when we talk about this, but with free will, is this a moment that Odysseus has free will? Because Athena is right there. She's directly involved. She is whispering, as he said, in Telemachus's and Odysseus's ears to say, this is what we're going to do. Even though she's disguised the whole time, basically. They're all aware, it's Athena, obviously. You're my girl, okay? You got me so far. So can we hold Odysseus responsible for this? I think it's a very complex question that is fun to think about and to talk about. But I find myself thinking, okay, the suitors sort of had it coming. Okay, if I had to really decide, I'm not condoning it, but I get it. Okay. These women, the slave women, no, whether or not they were sexually assaulted, I don't think really matters because they don't have bodily autonomy no matter what. The power dynamic is too construed, so they're never going to be able to say yes to something like that. Maybe some of them enjoyed, okay, they can enjoy sex just because they're enslaved, but we don't hear from them, so we don't know their situation. Odysseus doesn't ask any questions.
Yeah, he's not really concerned about those details. And I thought it was interesting because there was one slave in particular that I was like, that was out of line. Penelope does reveal in this last section, she's like, hey, just so you know, I've been fending these guys off by weaving during the day and unweaving at night. And that plan was awesome for 3 years until one of the slave girls mentioned to one of the suitors, ratted me out and said, hey, she does this at night and only we know because we're around her. Why don't you catch her? So that betrayal of confidence was given. And I was like, snitches get stitches, Joey, isn't that what you kids say? It was, somebody has to pay for that betrayal because all the information that we are given on the background of Penelope and Telemachus, they really did care for the slaves. They provided for them. I don't think being an enslaved person is a great thing to do. Obviously, I'm not advocating for that, but it was portrayed in the poem that they were well loved, well cared for, that they were not in danger of losing their life as a condition of being in servitude to this family.
That's an interesting point because to go back to what you often ask, who is this for, this poem for? And specifically, who is hearing this? Obviously, it's oral tradition before it's written down. Is this being told to enslaved people? I don't know the answer to this. That would require research on my part, and I didn't think about it until you brought it up. Is the audience for this Homeric epic going to be people who own slaves? Or is it going to be slaves themselves? I would imagine that slaves would hear it. Okay, just going off of what I think is common sense historically, I doubt that enslaved people are being told this purposefully. I would imagine it's people with some type of financial freedom and status who are getting these from the bards because you probably got to pay to play, okay? They probably want some money for their song. So that's an interesting idea, and I don't know the answer to that, but what you're saying made me think, because I think you're right. Why is this posited as the slaves were well cared for and well tended for, and that they were generally pretty happy? Because I don't think enslaved people, no matter where you're at and what time period, I don't think you have a great time. I think you would much rather have your freedom and your own property and bodily autonomy and access to work and all of the things that go with freedom. So that's an interesting idea. I will look into that because I'm not sure.
I appreciate you saying to have a choice about how you spend your time. That is the greatest freedom. And they were denied that. Odysseus is recognized by a scar on his leg that he had since being a young man. His nanny recognized this scar on him, and she's like, I sat your little infant body on your grandfather's knee and said, name this child. You have waited so long for this child. So to me, it is part of this family legacy. They are treated as people who have a shared history, this shared caring and milestones. It's a very tricky balance for me to understand where they may be coming from. Often we talk about whose perspective is being represented. Obviously, the enslaved people are not being represented. We don't know what they're thinking, other than the words they're put in their mouth of, we're so grateful that our master is back. What would we do without them? Please show us the way. The people who are writing the history were probably not the people who were the victims of enslavement.
And to be fair, the enslaved people are the ones with the practical skills. These rich royals don't know shit. They don't know how to take care of themselves. They don't even bathe themselves or clothe themselves. They don't cook their own food. They don't get their own water. They don't get their own wine. These people would be out of luck without these people. So I think it's just interesting, again, what you were just saying. They seem so excited that Odysseus has finally returned. Their master has returned. They kiss his feet and they touch his knee to show their respect to him and sort of suck up to him. And it could be just a show. They're like, oh, he's back. Okay, all right. Well, I know what to do here. But I feel like the poem is really trying to get us to think that they genuinely think that this is a good thing that Odysseus has come back. And to an extent, if you were born into slavery or if you lived most of your life into slavery, I'm sure that changes your perspective on things and you sort of are just more accustomed to certain things. I'm not saying that they don't have their own thoughts and feelings outside of like, oh, wish Odysseus was dead because maybe I could have got my freedom this way. But it is just an interesting thought.
And Joey, that brings me to another idea related to that of fate, of lineage. If your father was a nobleman and you were born a male, you too, my friend, will be a nobleman. You will inherit the property, all of the worldly goods of your father if another vicious or more strong king doesn't come and invade your country and take it away from you. So I think this idea, as you were saying, if you were born into a certain hierarchy, and you, quote unquote, know your place in it and how the world that you live in is structured, there may not be any ideas of how would you change that? It's like going against the gods, right? If Zeus says don't do it, you don't do it, because if you do it, it's going to have a huge ramification. So I just thought that was really quite interesting. Joey, can we talk about the legacy that Telemachus is coming into from both his father and his mother?
Certainly throughout this poem at this point, we should all know that Odysseus has a reputation that precedes him. He is in songs about Troy. The suitors all know that he is a deadly threat to them, like a mortal threat, and they are correct because he murders them all. But Penelope, it's very interesting because now we really get to hear Penelope speak, where in the beginning, obviously it makes me think of Ulysses by James Joyce, which it should. But of course, we get the final chapter of Ulysses from Leopold Bloom's wife. I feel like I refer to this so much. Anyway, it doesn't matter because this obviously precedes Ulysses. But anyway, it's really interesting that we finally get to hear a lot from Penelope and what is going through her mind. We get a little bit in the beginning. She's not completely silent, of course. We do hear from her, but this is when she gets a lot of dialogue and a lot of page time, or a lot of airtime, I guess, if you're listening to it. I just want to read something that she says. So Penelope, when she sees Odysseus, but she doesn't know it's him yet, she thinks he's still just this sort of poor stranger. She says, "Stranger, how could you have evidence that I excel all other women in intelligence if you were kept in rags, your skin all sunburnt in my house? Human beings have short lives. If we are cruel, everyone will curse us during our life and mock us when we die. The names of those who act with nobleness are brought by travelers across the world, and many people speak about their goodness." This was really fascinating. Maybe this was what was surprising to me. I just remembered that this was something that I noted and wanted to talk about because she's talking about her own legacy. Outside of Odysseus and Ithaca and Telemachus, she's talking about her own legacy. What will people remember Penelope of Ithaca for? Not how she's related to any man in her life. What deeds did she do and what will she be remembered for? I think she knows she'll be remembered for her wit when it comes to the shroud that she was doing for 3 years and unraveled, as you mentioned. And I think that she wants to be remembered for her hospitality, and that she would be pious enough to do this because, as we mentioned in our other episodes, that this is a super important part of this story and of Bronze Age Greece hospitality, because you're motivated with the potential threat that that stranger is a god or goddess and you do not want their wrath. So you're going to treat them with the utmost kindness. And so I thought it was really, really interesting that when we finally get to hear Penelope speak, that she's concerned about her immortality, if you want to call it that, her own story. What will people remember Penelope by? To just wrap that thought here, it's really interesting when we get the nanny Eurycleia, she's not really concerned with her legacy because she very much immediately is ready to snitch on the slave women that had sex with the suitors. She recognizes Odysseus, as you mentioned, with the scar on his foot from the boar when he was a kid. And he chokes her out and like grabs her by the throat and is like, "Don't you say anything or I'll kill you." And she's like, "No, no, no, I wouldn't. But guess what? Don't kill me because I have information on these women that were sleeping around behind your back and you got to keep me alive for that." So I think we can see what are the priorities of these two women. Eurycleia is an enslaved woman and we have a queen of Ithaca. One is worried about what people will say about her when she's dead. And the other, which is all the way on the bottom of the totem pole, is worried about surviving the next moment. She wants to secure that, not a legacy. So that was really fascinating to me.
I'm always jumping to Odysseus's defense, which surprises me and makes me laugh. But as I recall in that particular sequence, the reason he needed to silence her is that she was going to spill the beans about his plan. He's like, I've worked so hard to stay under the radar, to be stealth. Last week, we talked about these loyalty tests. He was kind of feeling people out. Are you on Team Odysseus? Are you not? Can I trust you? And he didn't want a woman, especially a woman, to blurt out, oh my God, he's back, and ruin this whole plan that they've been working with Athena and her guidance. He just didn't want to take a chance. Maybe
But
he
you
would
just
have.
got to choke her out to do that? Can't you just maybe like be like, shh, 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 shut the
Yeah, I
whatever?
think there's this like shh motion that would probably be as effective as this motion of chokehold. It just was curious to me how that came down. And we do hear beautiful things from Penelope in this last section. We get a feel for her being and her love of her husband as it's reported to us. They finally reunite, they go to the bed, and we'll talk about the bed later. They reunite, they make love, but the most important part, as it was portrayed to my ears, is that she said, okay, now we get to the good stuff. Can we just hear all of your stories? And she said she listened to him until all of his stories were done. And that was how they reconnected. I really love that image of them sharing stories. She's wrapped up in his storytelling, and she's just glad that he's back.
I think it certainly shows how complex Odysseus and Penelope are as characters, because Penelope doesn't know that mass murder has just been committed. I don't think she's particularly bothered by it. When she does find out, I think you can see that Odysseus especially has a full range of emotion, which we have talked about in our previous episodes, why he is such a complicated man, as Emily Wilson translated it, because he has the ability to go from just murdering people in the most disgusting ways and then has these very tender, intimate moments with his wife. And I think the bed is a really great detail about the Odyssey. I think it's something that a lot of people recognize, that part of the story, is because, of course, Odysseus shapes a bed out of an olive tree, and then he says he built the room around the bed. I especially love that Penelope's like, now I'm going to test you. You thought you were testing everybody? I don't care anymore. I'm a woman, and I'm the queen of this place, and you're going to get tested. So that is her test. She says to the nanny, go get my bed, like bring it out. And he's like, what are you talking about? That's impossible. Unless someone messed up. Okay, that bed's not moving. It's made of a tree. Again, I do really love that moment. I think it's very tender and intimate when they have this moment to reconnect physically as well. And then Odysseus gets to tell his entire story of 20 years, which, did you spark notes it, Odysseus? Because that's a lot of time that you condensed into one night.
Joey, I was so laughing because as he's recounting with Penelope in bed, listening to the story, he doesn't skip his dalliance with Calypso. I thought he might just be like, yeah, that's about wraps it up. I don't quite remember anything else.
That's it.
She wanted me for her husband, but I loved you, so I had to come back. And he was also talking about Circe, same situation. Those incidences get mentioned in his retelling of his life. I don't think he edited it down specifically for his wife. He was like, this is a factual retelling of the events that have kept me from you, but isn't it great now that I'm back? And Joey, one of the things that I was thinking about in this storytelling and envisioning it, as we will talk about next week, we both have read Madeline Miller's beautiful Circe. And that same scene gets played out between Circe and Odysseus. They stay up all night trading stories. She knows his dirt. She knows his. They know everything there is to know about each other, and they appreciated the viciousness of each other. They knew the treachery and the things that they had survived from other people, and also the crimes that they themselves have committed out of rage, out of pride, out of fear, out of retribution. So it was just a very interesting thing. I couldn't help but contrast that with, well, what did Penelope say that she did? Did she confess to anything? She didn't really have much to confess to, because she's like, I'm just sitting home waiting. I'm just fending these guys off, playing, as my mom would say, both sides of the table, just trying to ward off anything worse happening.
Yeah, I think overall, this has been a really fun experience for both of us to reread the Odyssey together and discuss it. And I like that we broke it up because it's very dense in what happened. As I said last week, I don't think it's like a dense poem to read. We will be reading Circe by Madeline Miller next week. And then we will be reviewing the movie. Well, we're not film critics, but we're going to give it a shot anyway. We're going to be able to compare it to the book and see what changes were made and if we like them, if we don't like them, if we don't get it. So stick around, we'll find out what we think.
It's going to be great, Joey. And just one last plug for why we are reading something adjacent to the Odyssey. There has been a resurgence, at least in my literary world, of taking characters that appear in the Odyssey and giving them their own storyline. So Margaret Atwood did that with the Penelopead years ago, which is this beautiful, very small book. If you have not read it, I would highly recommend that to anyone. We have Circe's backstory, her origin, being the child of Helios, the god of the sun. We see everything that we've heard about in the Odyssey now through her perspective and her worldview. And I just think that is just really quite interesting because I think you and I often talk about, well, what would it be like to be a person in this story? What was their experience like? We're seeing it from the outside, but what was their experience? And yes, before we get any hate mail, we know this is imaginary. This is fiction. These are not real people. But I think because, especially myself, Joey, I've listened to this story over and over again, that these are people, characters, ideas, concepts that are alive for me because they have been repeated so much that they've become a part of the fabric of me. I think that is the joy of oral tradition as well, that perhaps people in their lifetime in ancient Greek, maybe they heard this 10 times. And when there's no TV, no internet, no written books, it might have stuck. Some of these messages and these ideas and these names may have formed their life and their worldview. So I'm just very excited to be part with you this long chain of people who throughout antiquity until today are still experiencing this, maybe for the first time or maybe for the third time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've been thinking about that as well. How many people have heard or read this story throughout the millennia now? That's a lot of people. It's always cool to think we have this deep connection to history. This is not a historical text. I mean, the people who enjoyed it and read it and consumed it in different ways. It's very interesting. And I'm glad that we're reading Circe specifically because I believe it's the New York Times that just published an article about the film and said the Odyssey has a Circe problem. The way that she was represented was not good enough, according to whoever wrote that article. I did not get to finish reading the whole thing. It'll be interesting that we get more information on Circe and then we see.
If you read that novel by Madeline Miller and come to our discussion next week and you're like, I don't really see the point of her. I really think she's this bad, evil witch who turns men to pigs because that is the branding that she has been given throughout the last 2,000 years, let's say, give or take. I think you may walk away with a very different conceptualization of who she was and what she was about.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to today's episode. And if you enjoyed it, please like, comment, subscribe, and share, pretty please. And you can follow us on TikTok at Extra Literary Affairs.
Great. See you next week, Joey. Bye.
Bye.